The Lord be with you. Reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. The rulers sneered at Jesus and said, "He saved others. Let him save himself, if he is the chosen one, Christ of God." Even the soldiers jeered at him. As they approached to offer him wine, they called out, "If you are the King of the Jews, save yourself." Above him there was an inscription that read, "This is the King of the Jews." Now one of the criminals hanging there reviled Jesus, saying, "Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us." The other, however, rebuked him and said in reply, "Have you no fear of God? For you are subject to the same condemnation. And indeed, we have been condemned justly, for the sentence we receive corresponds to our crimes. But this man has done nothing criminal." And he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." He replied to him, "Amen, I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the etymology of this feast of Christ the King. But I think that most of you probably are not. I want to fill you in on some of the details, how we have come to this feast, what this feast means, and how important it is to proclaim Christ the King of the universe, sovereign Lord over all creation. Some of you may have heard about the persecution of the church in Mexico. It took place over 100 years ago. There was a political party in Mexico called the Institutional Revolutionary Party. And they began with the idea of having land reform in Mexico. It was a secularist party. Secularist meaning that they did not want the church to have any influence over the Mexican people. And the church in Mexico was a very powerful church, and it had a tremendous amount of influence over the people. Very rapidly, this political party, which lasted until 1992, and I'll tell you a little bit about that, became what we call anti-clerical. Anti-clerical. It means that it was against the church, began to close the Catholic schools, close the convents, close the seminaries, persecute the priests. Religious services could only be held in a church, if that were possible in certain states in Mexico. Nuns and priests were not even allowed to wear clerical garb in the streets. And the church was persecuted. I think many of us here, at least, are familiar with the situation in Ireland, you recall, with the Bush priests. because the Catholic Church in Ireland was being persecuted by the Protestants in Northern Ireland and in England. And so, for those of you with an Irish heritage, you may have some familiarity with what took place. These priests, the bush priests, being persecuted and chased under fear of death, were saying Mass behind the bushes and in secret locations with faithful went to worship. Very similar to what took place in Mexico a little less than 100 years ago. We don't think of that, do we, in our own hemisphere, of the church being persecuted like that. Although, I suppose that today it's also true in different places in our own hemisphere, certainly in Europe and certainly in Africa. We've been hearing about the persecution of Christians in Nigeria. Thousands of Christians are being persecuted. Priests are being murdered. And religion in Nigeria is being persecuted. You know why. You know why. Many have lost their lives in Nigeria. But the church remains strong. The church remains strong. In 1925, Pope Pius XI knew what was going on in Mexico and other countries who were secularizing, removing religion from the public square. Secularization means that God's law no longer prevails. It is the law of man. Man's law prevails. Man makes up the rules. What man says is right is right. What man says is wrong is wrong. And the church is a threat to that mentality. The church is a threat to secularized governments. We have them today. Do I have to name them? You know who they are and where they are. But even under persecution, the church remains strong. So Pius XI wrote this encyclical, Las Primas. Basically it means, in the first place. You know what he said in the first place? In the first place, it's God's rule that governs the universe, not the rules of men. Las Primas, 1925, and then he instituted this feast of Christ the King. It's Christ's rule that prevails. And the church must remain a witness to that. And that's why the church is the enemy of a secularized, atheistic society. There was a movement in Mexico called the Cristeros movement. And it means the Christ movement. Cristeros, Christ, the Christ movement. And people gathered in small homes and hiding places, and they prayed, they encouraged each other, and invited priests in to say Mass for them. So remember, if a priest was caught in the street or bringing the sacraments, he was in danger of being executed. You've heard of the Mexican martyrs. They come out of this time period. Numerous people, priests especially, were martyred for their faith. But there's one that stands out in my mind. He's become a favorite of mine. Father Augustine Miguel Pro. Perhaps you've heard about him. Augustine Miguel Pro. He was a Jesuit priest. and he was studying in Rome. And after he was ordained, knowing how dangerous it was to go back to Mexico, he decided that he would go back and take care of his people. He snuck back into the country, began like one of those bush priests in Ireland, and secretly said Mass, heard confessions. But he wasn't satisfied with that. Many people were imprisoned. And many people were on death row. And he knew that they were being denied the sacraments, confession, and the Eucharist. But naturally, the government would not let him in to prison. So he did something ingenious. He got dressed up like a prison guard. And for a number of months, he walked in and out of prison and brought the sacraments to the people. Finally, he was caught. Sentenced to death. There are pictures of his execution. You can find them online. He knelt down, strange as it may seem, before two pillars, one vertical, one horizontal. And he said, "I forgive my enemies and those who are executing me with all my heart." Then he stood up, stretched out his arms, and shouted, "Viva Cristo Rey! Viva Cristo Rey!" Those were the words of the Cristeros movement. They were words that motivated people to stay faithful to Christ. Viva Cristo Rey! Long live Christ the King! And that government prevailed for many years in Mexico. Of course, the religious restrictions were somewhat lifted. The persecutions came to an end. But it was not until 1992 when the anti-clerical laws were erased from the books. You know who gave them the final push? The great priest, John Paul the Great. He brought to an end the anti-clerical laws in Mexico. Viva Cristo Rey! No government, no matter how powerful, can stand up to the rule of Christ. Christ will always prevail. It may take time. It may take time. But Christ will prevail. His kingdom will prevail. Let me just end this on a very happy note. Does anyone know who Fatima Bosch is? Fatima Bosch. B-O-S-C-H. She was chosen to be Miss Universe. She's a Mexican girl. And when they announced that she had won the contest, you know what she did? She made the sign of the cross, raised her hand to heaven, and said, "Viva Cristo Rey." God's justice may not be immediate, but it prevails. God love you. I believe in one